So I was at the scene, and all I had to go on was a bunch of weeds, a handful of seeds, and a couple of yeast packets aside from the victim, of course. This case is going to be a doozy. You may be asking, so are you saying there's a connection between Jesus' statements with weeds, seeds, and yeast packets? I believe so. Well, yeast, not yeast packets. And I think you might find it pretty cool connection too. Bible Sleuth here, and I'm back with the final mysterious episode in the series of Teaching by the Sea. Before we get into the mystery, I wanted to announce plans for other new content coming in the near future. So keep an eye out for a new playlist and please spread the word. With that out of the way, let's get to our mystery. To recap, the parable that initially started this series was the famous Sower parable, which Jesus told as he was teaching a large crowd, probably on the edge of the Sea of Galilee, which you should check out in Teaching by the Sea, both 1 and 2. As I mentioned in a previous episode, we have a serial teller for sure. I believe Jesus would often string several stories together to give a larger perspective. This series primarily came from what he told his disciples later in private. From what I could gather, he was demonstrating and teaching about the process of sowing the word into people. He then went on to explain that it was extremely important to sow the word and not hide one's light. In fact, it seems that hearing from God hinges on sharing what is heard, and not sharing runs the risk of losing what was given, as found in Mark 4:24 through 25. He then begins comparing the process that he taught to the kingdom of God. If you haven't taken a look at the first 3 videos on Teaching by the Sea, you should do that, as each builds upon today's video. One piece of evidence is these parables can be found in Matthew 13, Mark 4, and Luke 8. And up until now, we have not investigated the difference of these gospel accounts, but in this video, we will. Matthew and Mark both have slightly more detail than Luke, who omits a few of the parables that are found in the other 2 gospels. Last time we ended with the parable of what I call the sower who knows not how the seed sown will grow. This was found in Mark, but not in the other 2. However, Matthew adds a few that the other 2 did not have, and those are the ones that we will investigate today. So let's go to the scene in Matthew 13:24 through 30. He put another parable before them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while the men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed seeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, 'Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds?' He said to them, 'An enemy has done this.' So the servants said to him, 'Then do you want us to go and gather them?' But he said, 'No, lest in gathering the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn.' So do you have questions? I know I do. Let's compare notes. Did you wonder what are tares? Well, me too. I think when looking at Jesus' comparisons, it's important to look at what is being compared. In this parable, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed. The words used were good seed. The word used for good is transliterated kalos, which means beautiful, handsome, excellent, eminent, choice, surpassing, precious, useful, suitable. The man in this case is Jesus, as he identified himself in verse 37. And the seed sown is the children of the kingdom. The field is the world, and the tares are the children of the wicked one. In this case, the crop is specifically wheat. But did you hear what Jesus called his seed? Kalos. Let that sink in for those who feel unloved, unwanted, unwelcome. If you are a child of the kingdom, this is a clear message that Jesus loves you and wants to welcome you into his arms. This is how Jesus looks at you. The question I had to ask myself, what about the enemy? The word used is a strong word that means hostile, even hating. This enemy hates the man and sows tares into the field along with the wonderful seed that was sown by the man. This gives a perspective of how the world feels toward Jesus and his children, and more, this is evident as people are shaking fists at God and his children. So what are tares? I read once that tares are almost indistinguishable to actual wheat until they are fully grown. The difference is that the head or spike of a wheat plant has seeds attached that are encased in a thin shell-like substance that protects the wheat seeds. During a harvest, these are beaten on a threshing floor in the wind. This tells us something. Everyone is going to be shaken. The children of the kingdom to the reward, the children of Satan to punishment and fire. The wind blows the chaff away and the seeds fall down a hole in a container below. Tares have all of that, except there are no seeds. An important fact about tares is they do not grow on their own. They have to be planted. Are you asking what I'm asking? However, tares do serve a purpose. They act as a cover plant and are in the legume family so that they can be used to replace nitrogen back into the soil. So even though an enemy sows the tares into the world, i.e. those shaking fists at God, he still uses them for his glory whether they like it or not. During the time of Jesus, a farmer might have planted tares among the rows of a vineyard because the plants would help keep the weeds out. Tares prey on the vegetation around it to draw nutrients for its own growth. I believe Jesus was warning the disciples that if Satan cannot steal the seed that they sow, then he will try to plant weeds in the field along with the good wheat. However, God is the one who mysteriously brings the increase, as we discussed in the Teaching by the Sea Part 3. So here's the kicker. God actually uses them to strengthen his good crop. What the man says to the servant also gives a perspective of what we are not to do. It isn't our job to pull the tare out. How many times have I tried pulling weeds rather than sowing seed, fertilizing, or watering, and most importantly, letting God do what he's going to do? Let's move on to the last parables. Matthew 13, 31 through 32. He put another parable before them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches." He told them another parable. "The kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till it was all leavened." There seems to be some argument over these parables regarding whether they are positive or negative. I will admit a few things. First, I am not a scholar or an authority. Secondly, birds and leaven typically have negative connotations in the Bible. Remember that it was the birds that came and stole seed from the hard ground in the Sower parable. And during the Passover festival, leaven was and is not even to be found in the house, and definitely not in the bread, because it served as a symbol of sin. I would like to point out some things that I may have discovered though. Number 1, it is important to remember who or what Jesus is comparing. The first parable, the kingdom, is compared to a mustard seed, and the second, the kingdom, is compared to leaven. I have read multiple articles on mustard plants as herbs, and there seems to be a consensus of 3 possible varieties of mustard seed that fit Jesus' description, with experts narrowing that to black mustard. This particular variety, which was grown during Jesus' time, has a rather small seed, though not necessarily the smallest of all seeds, but would be the smallest of all seeds planted as a crop. Also, this plant grows extremely fast. Maybe that is Jesus' real comparison. The church only starts out with a handful of people, primarily of humble origins as well. That humble beginning didn't stay small. Remember that Peter preached and several thousand were converted in one setting on day one, the day of Pentecost. Some argue that the mustard seed grows into an ugly plant that will harbor evil, represented by the birds. That seems to go along somewhat with the parable of the tares, but I'm not sure I agree, because Jesus is going to return for a beautiful bride adorned with splendor, not a church that is mustard plant ugly. Could there be a connection between the leaven and the mustard seed? I mean, Jesus compared the kingdom to both, right? I looked for that possible connection between leaven and mustard and did manage to find one. I started asking myself some questions, such as, what value do mustard plants have in the culture of Jesus' time, and what about leaven? So let's talk to a baker about leaven, which seemed to be taboo in the Bible. The truth is, leaven was only forbidden in some instances, such as the Passover. In normal day-to-day bread baking, leaven was used. Leaven could come from many sources that were readily available, such as fruit and even honey. Mustard was a useful herb in creating a pungent sauce that was used in that time along with the leafy greens as a part of a balanced diet. But come to find out, it is also one of the top 10 pollinating plants for bees in honey production. Another interesting fact is that some mustard plants could literally germinate overnight. That is how fast they grow. So where is the connection? After a bit of research, I uncovered that yeast can be harvested from raw honey to make breads and other fermented foods and beverages. I really think it is important to know where they were when he was teaching these things, which may answer the following. Why the big deal about seeds and crops? So let's get our bearings. Where did Jesus start this teaching? The Sea of Galilee. Why is that important? Because the region of Galilee is in the Jezreel Valley, also known as the breadbasket of Israel. And that to me is huge, especially since most of his ministry was there, and most of the disciples were from there. What about leaven? Interestingly, in a 2007 NBC News article, they cited an archaeological find of a beehive industry. The discovery included 30 beehives, still intact, the evidence of honeycombs, and beeswax that dated back to 900 BC. Can you guess where those bees were located? Okay, being a Bible detective, I want the cold hard facts, not speculation. And in the case of these two parables, there only seems to be circumstantial evidence, even with the scholars. So I have to put my gut into this. I have to admit that most of the time, when I read that Jesus and the disciples are in a private time, I assume that the scene is at night in a dark setting with oil lamps lighting the scene. However, maybe my mind's eye view isn't correct, and maybe Jesus was looking out over the lush fields of Galilee, eating fresh hot loaves of bread with some greens, fish, and a mustard sauce. Could this have been told while enjoying the early evening as he expounded over the kingdom and spreading the gospel? What if the bees were buzzing around from one flower to the next, the air cool and fragrant from the fields, the small birds chirping as he explained the intricacies of reaching people and how he wanted the disciples to accomplish this mission, even when Satan sows his own seeds in the fields? These few parables, and I think most people agree, describe the speed in which the kingdom would grow and how that would happen. To me, the final two parables may serve as a closure to this specific teaching. Am I right? I don't know. Some of these things I have to accept as unsolved. But here's some questions for you. Did I learn from it? Did God speak to me in this? Did it open my eyes to changes that needed to happen in my heart? Did I grow more deeply in love with Jesus? Yes to all. How about you?